All right, here we go again. It is a Monday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, which means here we are for another episode of KUDEN Radio. Anyway, I may be flying this one a little bit solo or a lot of bit solo um, since Alexander had a family thing he had to take care of, doctor's thing with the son and whatnot. So he may be joining us a little bit later or he may not make it. So, again, I will do my best to jump back and forth uh, with folks in the chat and all that. But anyway, let's go ahead and kick this off, right? So, um, this past Friday, we had a class. For those of you that follow along regularly, right? This is not like independent episodes. I mean, they are, but um, there's a series, right? There's a flow to these things, and they coordinate with the Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday that I do on YouTube on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. There's a Friday masterclass that ties into all these things, so it kind of rounds everything out. But anyway, so last week, well, for a couple of weeks, right, we've been taking a look um, at not just Apo in directions to move, but directions that attacks could come in on, right? Well, last week narrowed everything down to just an attack coming in from one of three given points along, basically along the side, right? We're working this concept ikichigai, right? Ikichigai. It's just a Japanese phrase that means passing by, or to pass by, to pass off, that kind of thing. There's more connotations than just the walking by someone kind of thing, but that's where we played it, right? There is a Takagi Yoshiryu kata of the same name. We touched on it a little bit, but what we really did was just really dive into this whole idea of, what if he's not squaring off at the front, right? What if things aren't predictable? They're not coming in from an obvious angle anyway, right? So we're working this thing, right? And so during the class, right, it was just I needed to make a point because I saw several things that I'm going to be talking about during this episode just happening again and again and again, that was just not conducive to training. Were people's kamae correct? Yes. Was their evasion correct? Yes. Was their technique correct? Yes. Well, then what's the problem? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. But maybe this will give you an idea, right? At one point, I had everybody stop. I told one of my students to take up the just stand there, just stand there, right? I'm gonna walk past you, okay? And so I did. I simply walked past him. No attack, no punch, no grab, no hidden trick, nothing, right? And yet, before I had even reached the point where one of three possible attacks could occur, his shoulder, right? Before I even reached that point, right? I watched his shoulders tighten. I watched his weight shift. His lead hand began to come up, right? His body started preparing for an attack that never came, right? So now, before you understand what I'm doing here, what I'm saying, right? That wasn't because he was a bad student, right? Actually, he's quite the opposite. Right? He's a very good student. He was doing exactly what, not only what everybody else in that class was doing, he was doing exactly what a lot of dedicated martial artists, self-defense practitioners, or whatever, eventually learn to do. Good thing, bad thing, right? The problem was he wasn't responding to what was happening. What was he doing? He was responding to what he believed was about to happen. Those are not the same things. Okay? So this raises what I think is a fascinating question, right? What happens when we stop questioning the assumptions that good training naturally creates. Right? I didn't misread that from my notes. That wasn't a glitch in the system, right? What happens when we stop questioning the assumptions that good training naturally creates? Okay. Notice what I didn't ask. I didn't ask what happens when we have bad instruction. Well, go find somebody who's going to give you better instruction, right? I didn't ask what happens when we learn poor techniques. I didn't ask what happens when we don't train hard enough. No. I mean, we've talked about things like that over time. As a matter of fact, this is kind of a bridge, part of a two-part bridge episode between what we've been covering for several episodes, which are those things that students and instructors as well generally don't think of as getting in the way or inhibiting progress, right? So starting next episode, we'll take a look at elements that we do need, right? But this is another one of those things, right? So I'm not talking about any of those things, right? Bad training, poor instruction, not training hard enough, whatever, right? I'm talking about good training, authentic training, dedicated training. How the hell does that get in the way, right? I'm talking about the kind of training that produces disciplined, sincere, committed martial artists or self-defense practitioners, right? People who are focused and determined to learn solid, reliable, effective self-defense. Yes? Right? Because here's something I've been thinking about for years, right? This was something that was hinted at by a couple of my earlier teachers, right? But something that I've witnessed and tried to understand since, right? So every dojo, self-defense class, academy, whatever you want to call it, right? Dojo, dojang, ramalama ding dong, I don't care, right? Every dojo naturally gives us something that reality almost never does. I'll say that again. Every dojo, every self-defense class, every whatever, right? Naturally gives us something that reality almost never does. And that is information. It gives us intel, right? It gives us predetermined knowledge about some things that neither of us, attacker or defender, would know before the attack happened, right? We know who our partner, aka attacker defender, is, right? We know we're about to train in something physical. We know there's going to be an attack and probably what it is, right? Punch, kick, a grab, combo, weapon, whatever, right? We usually know which side it'll come from and to which part of our body, right? Sometimes we even know which technique we're practicing before our partner even moves. Now, none of that is wrong. In fact, it's necessary, right? That's how human beings learn. We all are human beings, I think, right? So, and I know how contradictory this is sounding, right? But this is where things get really subtle, and if we're not careful and we miss it, we can end up setting ourselves up with a bad case of false confidence. Okay? So to be clear, right? Again, this is how human beings learn. Also, to be clear, the dojo concept is one of, I think, the greatest inventions ever created for developing martial skill safely and progressively. right? Rather than chaotically or experientially, right? You either get it right or you don't, whatever. Okay. But what happens if we unknowingly become dependent on the very certainty, right, that certain levels of training have given us, right, that helped us learn at that stage or in those stages in the first place, right? What if the next step in our development isn't learning another technique? Okay. What if the next step in our development is about learning to let go of that pre-existing knowledge or information, like pretending that you don't know something that you wouldn't know on the street, right? Letting go of information that reality would never ever have given us in the first place in a real attack or during a real defense situation, right? So that's what I'd like to explore with you during this episode, because I believe there's a point in every serious martial artist journey where the greatest obstacle to progress is no longer a lack of effort or a lack of techniques or a lack of good instruction. It's actually the assumptions that naturally develop because the training has been working. I promise we will resolve this, right? And unless we begin recognizing those assumptions, they can subtly, unknowingly, right, become the very thing that gets in the way of our growth, of our progress. Okay. So tonight, for those of you who are new to the podcast, or maybe you haven't been in the dojo or seminars or whatever with me, others are going to smile as soon as they hear this, right? But I'd like to introduce a concept that I refer to in my dojo. Actually, my peers and I used this when I was coming up through the art, right? But I refer to in my dojo as dojo syndrome. As a matter of fact, you'll hear me identify it as a dreaded disease, right? That everybody's prone to, and we've got to inoculate ourselves against it. Dojo syndrome. Right? Not because there's something wrong with the dojo. In fact, it's quite the opposite, right? It's because understanding it may completely change the way you look at things like kata, drills, randori, your fundamentals, right? And perhaps even what it really means to actually train and prepare for reality. All right. So again, during this episode, the teacher and my producer that would be in the background, right? So anyway, let's talk about that and more when we get back.
So, the big question is this: how are self-defense and success-minded people like us, concerned citizens worried about protecting ourselves, our loved ones, and the things we care about from the monsters we know exist in the world? How do we train in a way that gives us the skills, knowledge, and understanding we need without becoming paranoid fighters or killers ourselves, and yet still allows us to be the hero protector the world needs us to be? That's the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Jeffrey Miller, and welcome to KUDEN Radio, real training for real people in a real world.
All right, welcome back. Episode, where are we? 318. So this is a kind of a tale transition from a series that I've been focusing on last couple of weeks, last couple of episodes, depending on whether you're a regular follower or you just found this stuff, where we've been looking at things that can get in the way of our progress, directly, indirectly, those kind of things, right? Mostly about where we're focusing. Okay. And so we're going to look at something very, very subtle. Well, several things, right? But more subtle today, right? Where we're going to look at how the training process can cause assumptions that can actually mess up training, right? We think we think we're progressing. We think we're moving on. We think we're getting better, and it's not that we're not, right? We are in certain areas, but the question, right? And if you jumped on early enough, or you saw the promo posts and things like that went out, or you're on the email list, then you saw the little picture, right? And then there's the question, right? The question is, are we training for the dojo? Are we training to be good in the dojo, or are we training to be good in reality? Wherever that happens to be, right? We'll define quote unquote reality, because that's a big phrase that keeps being thrown around a whole lot. That wouldn't work in a real fight. That wouldn't work during a real attack. Those kind of things, right? I think a lot of these things require more clarity, right? We need to be clear about what it is that we're saying, asking, whatever. Okay. As one of my teachers liked to remind me way back in the day, as a matter of fact, it was my Mikyo teacher, Reverend Jikai, vagueness begets vagueness. Okay. So it would be a shame if we did all this, spent all this time, effort, money, energy, whatever, right? To end up mediocre, to end up average. Okay. Anyway, all right. So before I jump into things, again, I have to be my own producer. So let's see who's on. If you haven't already signed in, go ahead and do that so I know that you're here. Alan's on, Kyle's on, Jared's on. Hey, Jared. Murray's on. Fantastic. For those of you who are saying hi to Sensei Alexander, he'll have to catch up on that later. Again, he had a family thing that involves his son and whatnot that he had to take care of, doctor thing, So he's either going to be late or I'm flying solo for the entire one. So we'll adapt. We'll do our thing. All right. So that being said, let me jump over to my notes because I don't want to forget anything. Okay. Again, as always, right? Thank you for spending part of your Monday evening or whatever time of day it happens to be where you are. Some of you are already in Tuesday, my Tuesday. But either way, right? Spending some of your time with us, right? And whether you're joining live or you're catching the replay in my future, right? On YouTube or on your favorite podcasting platform. As always, right? I'm glad you're here. I'm honored and humbled by the fact that, I don't know, folks keep coming back for more or whatever. Okay. But anyway, so I'll check again to see, for those of you who are signing in late and whatnot, but quick pause for some upcoming announcements because I just added another seminar to the schedule. It'll actually be the second one for 2027. So most of you know that we have our Fall Warrior Protector weekend intensive coming up October 16th, 17th, and 18th. The theme for that is lessons from the sword, right? So yes, we will be doing some things with the Japanese sword, but it's not a sword seminar. And I know that sounds confusing, pretty much like, I don't know, the introduction to this episode might have sounded confusing. Which is it, Sensei? Is it this or is it that, right? Is it about sword or is it not? Okay. No, we're using the sword because I think it's one of those things that makes it easier to uncover the core universal principles that is in practically everything. Okay. Regardless of whether we're talking about sword or unarmed or hanbo or whatever. Okay. So we're doing that. And then right now I don't have anything on the schedule. I take that back. I don't have date set for an upcoming instructor training program that I will be doing. Right. We'll be doing some of the stuff live at the dojo. There'll be Zoom access as well. But that program, as always, right? Some folks have already been through it. And it's not about how to teach technique step by step. Everybody that's going to be in the program already knows how to do whatever techniques you already know. It's not about that. It's about the skill sets required to be a good teacher. Right? Because, I don't know, the martial arts is a really strange animal, other than for other obvious reasons. What I mean by that is it is the only industry, field, endeavor, whatever, that I know of or that I can think of where the assumption is if you know how to do it, right? If you earned your black belt or you learned lessons or whatever, that automatically qualifies you as a teacher. And while it is true that if you teach someone something in that moment, you're a teacher. But the skills necessary to be an effective teacher, to help students progress in an effective, efficient flow, I would even say quicker than you learned it, helping them to engage with the training more. I'm not a big fan of like motivation and stuff like that, because I don't think it's possible to motivate another human being. I could say something that's inspiring or whatever that they might decide to stay or whatever, but to motivate another human being to do something usually requires an award or I don't know, a whip or a gun to their head or something like that. But that's not what we're talking about, right? So these are the skill sets that all good teachers, all good trainers in all industries have. As a matter of fact, during one of the first iterations of this long time ago, one of my black belts that was going through the program, and by the way, you don't have to be a black belt, you can be a white belt to go through this. But one of the ones going through was a university professor with 2 doctorate degrees. Okay. And had just started one of the classes, right? And she just started laughing. And I just stopped and I said, did I say something funny? And she shook her head no. She and everyone else was in a line, just sitting in Seiza. We're in the dojo. They're on the mats. She just kind of leans out, looks down the line, and she goes, I have been teaching I think at that point she had been a professor and teaching for 15, 20 years, something like that. And she said, they never taught me this stuff when I went to school to be a teacher, when I went and got my degree in education. I had to figure this stuff out on my own. And the stuff he's giving me, stuff he's giving us. Later, she told me she was integrating that stuff into her university level courses and things like that. Again, this is not bell ringing. This is just one of those things that it was validation from someone in the teaching field, right? People set a goal about being a martial arts teacher before they set a goal for being a black belt, or they set the goal of black belt because they want to teach. They're not the same. Okay? They're not the same. Can you do it? Sure you can. Can you do it effectively? Maybe. Okay? But anyway, so as soon as those dates are on, I'll make sure that those things get out to everybody that's on the mailing list. And if you're on the social platforms and whatnot, you'll probably see something. And of course, I'll mention it in upcoming episodes. What else do we have? Then after the new year, the second weekend of January, the 8th, 9th, and 10th, is our yearly Daikomyo Sai New Year's intensive. That theme is revisiting the fundamentals. So that'll be designed not to teach Omotagyaku, teach Udagyaku. No, everybody will probably already know those. We might have one or three people or whatever that has never seen them, but it's not about that, right? It's about how do we move the bar to get these things closer to street ready, because you are not going to be able to grab a hand out of the air the way the model teaches. Sorry. I mean, I should never say never. It's been my experience in the field and background that I have had that it would be very difficult. Yeah, it'd be like snatching that fly out of the air with chopsticks that Miyagi Sensei did in the Karate Kid, right? Anyway, there's that, and then the new one that's on the well, it's not. It's everything's been put in place, right? It's not on the events page yet, and the registration page isn't up yet, but it will be here within the next couple of days. I will be doing a one-day seminar, like a noon to 5 kind of thing, in Winter Haven, Florida. About, what is it, 30 minutes to an hour from Tampa, depending on which way you're coming from. And so we're going to be focusing on the Kyujutsu that's built into the techniques already, right? The deception thing, right? The ninpo layer over things, right? We're also going to take a look at shuriken, okay? Both thrown and handheld, and we're going to take a look at some ninja ruki, stealth walking, okay? And not just for stealth, right? So anyway, if you're in that area, there'll be a Zoom option as well for anybody that wants to get in on that. I'm going to set things up at my dojo because my students aren't going to be able to travel down there. And full transparency, the day after, right? Reason why I'm doing it there is the day after. My wife and I are on a cruise ship for, I don't know, 10 days, I think, going to Panama and places like that. So anyway, so my students will probably not be following me, but what we're doing is we're going to be setting up the Zoom and all that, our regular cyber stuff in the dojo. And so the students that are still, there and whatnot, will be participating in the seminar from the academy. So folks are more than welcome to do that from wherever you happen to be in the world, right? So anyway, so that's the second thing, and right now we're exploring also the night before that Friday evening. So we're talking, what is that? Saturday, January 30th, 2027 will be the noon to 5 thing on the ninpo layer of things. But the night before, Friday evening, probably looking at about 6 to 9 p.m. That's Eastern time. My friend and student Victor Acevedo from Florida Budo, he's the host. He would like me to do something for those folks who are interested in Mikyo. So, and again, we're not weaving that into the regular taijutsu thing. Not everybody wants to do that. But for those who do, there'll be that additional opportunity Friday evening. So cool. I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, we've already got 2 things planned into 2027. And right now I'm kicking dates around. Actually, we have 3 things in. The Japan trip for 2027. May 10th through, what is it, 24th maybe? May 10th. Oops, one too many. Monday, May 10th, returning, again, this is Eastern time, right? Returning Monday, May 24th. It's a 2-week trip. We're there, 14 days, 13 nights, something like that. or however it works out, because we lose a day going and gain a day coming back. But we will have, because not everybody can do 2 weeks, right? So we will have a 1 week option as well. So somebody that can only do 1 week can do the lead week or the secondary week, because we will only have one transfer day where I will meet people, get them to the hotel, all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, it just eats into the itinerary, because our group does not go to Japan and just post up, go to the dojo, eat, sleep, shit, train, whatever. It is a full training trip, and that includes history, that includes culture, that includes a whole bunch of things. It is not a vacation. However, please feel free to use it as one. But we will be going to Tokakushi Mountain. We'll be visiting a Japanese castle that has a nightingale floor that was created by somebody prominent from one of our ninja families, all kinds of things, right? And I've got something new on the agenda for this time around as well, connecting to literally ancient samurai living. Okay, that'll be cool. Anyway, so that might be on the event page. I don't know. I've got to get a bunch of these things on. So we have 3 events already scheduled for 2027, and I'm looking to get the spring and fall events scheduled ASAP. So that is what I have, right? So anyway, all right, let me just see if anybody else jumped on, signed in. What do we have here? Let's see. Hello, Trinity's on. Excellent. Diego is on. Diego Armando Pararuiz, I think. Sorry, it's been a long time since I have done my Espanol. So picking up the good evening from Tolima, Colombia. Taekwondo practitioner. Awesome. Cool. All right. Fantastic. Let's make sure I didn't miss anybody. Alan's probably all posted up there in his comfy chair with his big gulp or whatever the equivalent is next to it. I like picking on Alan just because he's one of my personal students. So maybe one of these days he'll jump ship and tell me I'm an asshole. And goes, well, he's not going to do that. He's a former Marine. So it's be like the pot calling the kettle black, right? Anyway, all right. So not sure. Like I said, I'm not sure if Sensei Alexander is going to be able to join because of his prior commitment and whatnot with family. So we'll see. If not, here we are. All right. So we bring up my notes and we will jump into this thing. All right. Again, for those of you who are just jumping in, I thank you for spending the extra time. Okay. So again, also, if you've been enjoying these recent KUDEN episodes, or any of them, I have students let me know on a regular basis that they've binged watch or binged listen to all these damn things. And Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday, that's quite a feat, since again, this is episode 318 for this one, and I've got about 300 Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday things as well. So kudos to you, right? So if you've been enjoying these things, I think you're going to love the weekend intensives and stuff that we've got going on, right? Because they're really designed to let us get off of YouTube or get out of this KUDEN type of training, right? And actually do the work together, right? I mean, that's really the point, right? So now, tonight's discussion, right? This episode's discussion really builds on the last several episodes, right? A few weeks ago, we talked about changing perspective. Last episode, we talked about how familiarity eventually turns into assumptions, right? Tonight, I'd like to ask a question that naturally grows out of both of those conversations. Okay. It's a question that I've been thinking about, observing, and dealing with, right, for years, right? And it's one that I honestly wish someone had asked me to cover much earlier, right, in this series. But it's really difficult to ask a question about something that we might not be able to see. Okay. So here's the question. What happens when we stop questioning the assumptions that good training naturally creates? Okay. Now, if you were on for the pre-intro vid monologue, right, I apologize. You're going to hear some, so it's going to sound familiar, right? But it bears repeating, right? What happens when we stop questioning the assumptions that good training naturally creates in us? Okay. Notice what I didn't ask. I didn't ask what happens if we have a crappy instructor and they're not teaching it correctly, right? I didn't ask what happens when we're learning our techniques incorrectly, right? Or bad techniques at all, right? I didn't ask what happens when we don't train enough. We're not consistent enough with our training, right? I didn't mention any of that. I'm talking about good training, right? Authentic training, right? Dedicated training, right? You're training regularly. You're being consistent. Good training, good, right? Okay. Whether you train with me or somebody else, doesn't matter, right? Training that really is helping students improve. Okay. Because I believe every dojo, dojang, whatever, right? Including mine. And that's important, including mine. This is not me on a pedestal knocking other people, places, things, whatever. Okay. Including mine. Every dojo naturally creates something that every serious instructor eventually has to help students move past, move beyond. Right? Now, this started back when I was a young buck coming up through the ranks, pre-black belt, all that stuff, right? My teachers used this, my peer group used this, right? And over the years, I've come to refer to this on a regular basis in the dojo when people are doing certain things, right? There's this, I call it a dreaded disease, but we'll refer to it as the phenomenon that it is, that I term dojo syndrome, right? You know what syndrome is, right? It's kind of like a disease, but okay. And again, before anybody takes this the wrong way, misunderstands me or whatever, right? I am not criticizing dojo training. I'm not criticizing the martial arts class structure, academy, dojo, whatever you call your thing, right? I'm not criticizing that type of training, right? It's quite the opposite, right? I mentioned this earlier on, right? Before the intro, right? In my opinion, I think the dojo, this construct, right, is one of the greatest educational environments, okay, ever developed. Okay. But the question isn't whether or not dojo training works. Everybody likes to say that it does, right? I can't do long distance training, sensei, because only dojo training works. Whatever. Maybe I've done more historical training or more historical research and study. But I'm not going to have that debate during this one, right? It's not about whether or not dojo training works. The question is, what was it designed to do? And before we just jump to the conclusion, to teach me techniques, to teach me skills, I would hope that people know by now that we go much deeper than the obvious. Okay. Because if we really had a discussion on the dojo concept, we would have to have a discussion about warriors who now were living in a time of peace and had no sellable skills through which to make money. And so they started teaching rich people watered down versions of killer techniques. But nobody has to believe me. They just have to do their own research. Okay. Anyway, for our purposes, right? What was the dojo construct designed to do? And just as importantly, what wasn't it designed to do? What's it supposed to be? What is it not supposed to be? Okay? Because if we don't understand these differences, we can, without knowing it, we can mistake progress inside the dojo, right? Being good at our stuff in the dojo. We can mistake that for being prepared for the chaos and shitstorm of an actual attack outside of the dojo. Okay? And those are not always the same thing. Okay. Now, for those of you who know me, you know what my background is and whatnot. For those of you who are new to this, right? I'm a former federal police officer. I was an Army cop for quite a while. And before you think that's just somebody who writes parking tickets on a military installation, what that means is that 70% of the people that I ever arrested during my military career were trained killers, not just drunken jackasses out on the street. Okay. Not that they can't fight, right? But I had to get people in cuffs that were bigger, stronger, faster, and trained to kill. Okay. I was also a counter-terrorist operative during the 80s in what was then West Germany. So shit was blowing up, all kinds of stuff. Okay. So I know a little bit, maybe a little bit more than a little bit, about what it's like being inside of an attack bubble. Okay. And what reality is to me. So when somebody says that something will or will not work for real, right, or in a real fight, they're in for maybe not the usual conversation for me, if I want to talk to them at all. Okay. But again, these things are not the same thing, right? So before I jump in any farther, let me just see if anybody else jumped in. I don't want people to feel like they're left out or whatever. So let's see. Anybody else? Anybody else? Going. Freaking Alan. These Marines drinking a Crayola milkshake. Fantastic. I hope your tongue stains rainbow color. You know what that means in 2026. Anyway, all right. So here we go. Let's see. All right. So Dojo syndrome, right? So, like I said, my peer group used this. My teachers used the phrase, right? But I don't know. Maybe one of the reasons why I hesitated for years before using this phrase publicly or addressing it in the context of KUDEN, right, is because I knew people could easily misunderstand it, right? Some might hear it and think I'm saying there's something wrong with traditional dojo training. I'm not. Others might assume I'm suggesting that kata don't work. Again, that's not what I'm saying. In fact, I believe the exact opposite. But still not the same way that most people argue about them. Okay? I think traditional dojo training is brilliant. Okay? It's a self-contained support group, microcosm. It's a place where people can focus on this one thing, right? Now, technically, anywhere you find yourself training is your dojo. So it could be a park, could be whatever, right? But when it's a place to go away from distractions, put the cell phone away, and for an hour, hour and a half, whatever, day or two, if you're doing seminars, right? There's nothing like it, right? But, however, I also think that, like any educational system, it has to be understood properly. Okay? Because in my experience, there are actually two forms of what I call dojo syndrome. Okay? One is essential. One is absolutely critical to training. And the other becomes dangerous if we don't recognize it. Okay? So what are we talking about? Right? So let's begin with the good one, right? The good one. Imagine teaching someone to drive. If you ever taught somebody to drive, I'm 63, coming up on 64, which means I've had a couple of kids to teach how to drive, and I've helped some friends learn how to drive, right? But imagine teaching someone to drive, right? Would you put them into rush hour traffic in a major city, like right off the bat? Of course not, right? You'd start them in an empty parking lot. Why? Well, because not only are you sane and you want to keep your car, right? But you've temporarily removed most of the chaos that they're eventually going to have to deal with, right? You've brought things down. You've isolated specific skill sets, okay? Not because parking lots and navigating empty parking lots is the goal, right? It's because parking lots are the classroom, right? So what we do is we simplify the environment so the student can focus on fundamentals: steering, braking, awareness, what else? Coordination, confidence, right? At least I hope that's what you would be working on, right? Only later, after those basics begin becoming dependable, do we gradually introduce greater complexity. We don't make the vehicle more complex, no matter what vehicle you get into. Now, we get into a big rig, it's more gears because of the way the transmission's made or whatever, but across the board, sedan, sports car, SUV, minivan, whatever, okay? The only things they're going to switch out is automatic transmission over manual transmission. But steering is steering, acceleration is acceleration, braking is braking. Freaking pedals are in the same place. Slowing, stopping, managing speed, staying within the lines. They stay the same. But the environments we're driving in, time of day, amount of traffic, right? In construction zones, speed. That's what changes. And the ability to still navigate that stuff under pressure with little to no change in feel or function, right? Martial arts has always worked the same way. Okay. The dojo intentionally removes most of the unpredictability of real violence. I know. before people like start to spaz out, right? There's sparring, there's competitions. Not having that discussion. Okay. The dojo intentionally removes much of that unpredictability, okay, for a while. I'm not saying that it doesn't slowly introduce it. Now, some people introduce it way too fucking early. However, sorry, you can tell when I'm testy about people not understanding how to be a teacher and not how to be a teacher, how human beings learn. How about that? Right? So it's not because reality doesn't matter. We all know it does. And if you're in martial arts for more than like style and cool and respect and confidence and earning a black belt and doing flippy kicks and breaking board, if you're in it to survive pretty hairy shit, okay, then reality does matter. We know it matters, right? It's not because reality doesn't matter. It's because beginners can't yet learn effectively inside that level of chaos. That's why the churn rate in wrestling-based and fight club kind of groups is so freaking high. Now, they'd like to blow it off to, well, people just aren't as dedicated. You got to be tough for this stuff or whatever. So if we're just going to write off every family man or woman who wants to protect themselves and their kids from the brutality that exists in the world, we're just going to write them off. I'm not sure what kind of warrior protectors we call ourselves. But that's not us because we're all enlightened, right? So anyway, right? So it's because people aren't ready for that level of chaos. And that's really what we're learning how to do. Let's be very, very clear about this. If you are learning self-defense, it's not just about the moves. You are learning how to make sense out of the chaos and be able to operate inside of it without losing your shit. As effectively and efficiently as possible to not die in the process. Unless we don't understand the definition of the word martial, which has to do with warfare, that's what Budo is about. Okay? So, what do? We slow things down. We isolate movements, right? We repeat. We practice kata. Not because we're going to use them in the fight, but because they're what we might call expert role models. You want to be an expert? Well, here's how an expert in this particular system would solve that problem. Punch coming in, kick coming in, knife coming in, whatever, right? We perform drills over, right? We stop, we correct, we repeat again, right? That's not unrealistic. That's good teaching. That's good structure, okay? Without that developmental environment, very few people would ever build dependable fundamentals. So if that's all dojo syndrome meant, we wouldn't even be having this conversation tonight. Okay? Because in one form, dojo syndrome is like a bike with a lot of training wheels. 2 on the front, 2 on the back, 4 in the middle, whatever. Okay? And the process starts them out when they sit on it. They don't have to worry about falling over. Okay? If you've ever had a kid learning how to ride a bike and you put training wheels on it, he'd have to do a lot to get that bike to fall over, or you'd have to back up and put the training wheels on wrong, right? Doesn't have to worry about falling over. So now he can focus on pedaling and getting that freaking coordination right. If it has pedal brakes, learning how to do that, right? Steering, those kind of things. And then over time, we will systematically start taking off training wheels, right? Making right turns a little bit less guided, right? Remove more and more of the safety net until pretty soon, hops on his bike and rides to his friend's house. Right? And then if he wants to, he might decide to specialize his skill toward certain things. Marathoning, racing, trail riding, right? Out in the woods, doing shit, right? BMX, trick stuff, whatever. Okay. Anyway, so like I said, if that's all dojo syndrome meant, trust me, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Okay. The problem actually begins later, much later, right? Not in the beginner stages. Okay. At least not in my dojo anyway. Not in the dojos that I trained with my teachers. Okay. But much, much later, right? After the student has developed some confidence, after techniques begin feeling familiar, comfortable, right? I know those. I can do those, right? After partners have trained together for months or even years, something very subtle starts happening. Okay. Tell you what starts happening. Happens tonight in class, and I warn students, and it's going to happen all week. I'm going to be highlighting this type of dojo syndrome. And I'm probably going to be barking more than normal. Okay. Because the students that I'll be focusing on won't be the beginners. It's going to be the ones who don't know they're doing it and have to break it so what they're doing doesn't break their training, doesn't create something that can't be relied upon out on the street. Okay. So what I'm talking about here is without anyone intending it, right? This is not a conscious level thing, right? We have to bring it into left brain. We have to bring it into awareness. Otherwise, we can't fix it, right? So without anyone meaning for this to happen, right? The dojo begins giving us information, right? That reality almost never will. I say almost because in the senior and Tatsujin levels of training, your assessment abilities and your discernment abilities and your ability to read someone based on their fight posture and their movement and things like that, even their build, right, can hint at what kind of fighter they probably are, right? And it's not because they're in shape, out of shape, whatever. It's because their shape and their build determines speed ability, strength ability, those kind of things, right? And people combine that with personality type and identity, and what you have are the beginnings of what causes people to choose one martial or fight system over another. Okay. So anyway, what starts happening? Okay. We know our partner. That means we know the attacker, right? We know today's lesson. Teacher just demonstrated it. So I know what's going to happen, when, what the steps are, all that stuff, right? I know what the attack's going to be, right? I know whether it's a punch, grab, kick, double hand grab, combination, what parts of the body it's coming to, all that kind of stuff, right? And if we're not careful, people who spar, depending on the lesson structure, people start picking and choosing their favorite techniques, their favorite punches, their favorite kicks, those kind of things, and then they become predictable without even knowing it. They think it's their tricks. They just become predictable, right? So again, we know these things, right? We know what the attack's going to be. We know, as soon as they take up a certain stance or they start moving that leg a certain way, right? We know whether they're going to punch, kick, whatever, right? We usually know roughly, right, when it's coming, right? The timing, right? Sometimes we even know how the technique is supposed to finish before anyone's even moved, before the first punch has even been thrown, right? And again, first form of dojo syndrome, none of that's wrong. It's simply a part of learning. But if we stay there, if we unconsciously become dependent upon that certainty, right? If we're in the Bujinkan and every frickin' punch is ski and every kick is a front stomp kick, and we never switch out to jabs, hooks, uppercuts, combinations, grab punch attacks, lateral kicks, roundhouses, spinning wheel kick, whatever, right? The shit that everybody else is learning and getting really good at, right? I mentioned Bujinkan, but fill in the blank with anybody's martial style, and the confidence creep that kicks in. Not that somebody's a creep, I mean that it creeps in, right? Where, well, of course, what I'm doing is best. Duh. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be doing it. And then we knock everybody else as not knowing how to do it right. Careful, you don't get your ass kicked by somebody who doesn't know how to do it right. Okay? So what really starts happening, though, is not about the techniques. It's not about the training model. It's that something starts changing inside of us. It's not because the technique stopped working. It's because our perception starts reorganizing itself around information, right? Around information that reality would never have given us in the first place, okay? Of course, these people that are demonstrating on videos and stuff like that, me too, right? We set up this attack and everything so I can teach a very specific lesson, those kind of things, right? And so I'm going to demonstrate the same technique over and over and over again. It's going to start, have a middle, and an ending, probably, right? The same way. 5, 10, a dozen times till we change things, right? Yeah, it's an orchestrated lesson. People get really good, right? And as they should, practice that again and again and again to come up speed 8, 9 out of 10 times, correct at 80% minimum full speed. Awesome. That's proficiency. Yes. Okay. But what if, without anybody telling you, he threw a different attack? Would everything just go to shit in a hell in a handbasket, so to speak? Or would we be able to adapt to that? And then after we have controlled the situation or moved ourselves to a safe position, go, dude, it's this kind of, we're working on this particular technique. Okay. I was just sharing a story the other day. After I got out of the military, was just working a local warehouse job kind of thing. And met somebody that lived in the same apartment complex, a bunch of buildings and whatnot. And we got talking martial arts and self-defense, and he really wanted to learn. Cool. So we arranged for a day. We would just meet out in this field park area that was kind of common area, right? All these apartment buildings around it. And so we meet next to this big tree, and he brings his nephew along, right? And nephew sits down at the tree, I don't know, 12, 13, give or take. This guy, wants to train. So I'm going to teach him this first technique against the hook punch, right? We're going to do this uke dome, a block kind of thing. And then there's a shot to the jaw and a takedown, very Tagagi Yoshin like, right? And I said, okay, so only rule we have is don't punch any faster than you want to get hurt, because the trick is to move in time with the attacker. Whatever their timing is, I'm going to mirror that. So we need to keep this at a workable speed so you can see and understand it. Then we can practice it. You can do it, that kind of thing, right? Yeah, I understand. Good. And then he threw his right hook, caught me right in the jaw, snapped my head around, and I brought my head back. And I said, okay, so next punch, right? We're going to do it again, right? Calm down. We're going to do it again. I just want you to go slower, okay? Because if I had caught that, your arm gets damaged. Okay? Well, he's freaking out because he was just so excited or anxiety or whatever. And he didn't know that he didn't mean to throw the punch that fast and that hard. So I didn't tell him to slow down because, like, wasn't used to getting hit. Remember, I spent 7 years as an Army cop. Getting hit was an everyday thing, right? But speed was not what I expected. The training needs to produce somebody that, when the unexpected happens, our house of cards doesn't fall down. Our fundamentals don't fall apart. Okay? One of the things that my teacher, both of my early teachers in the art, did to people that were coming up on a certain rank where it was about street proficiency, not cage fighting kind of shit, but just dealing with the average individual, using taijutsu alone, right? What they would do, and I inherited, so I do it all the time. When people are coming up close to that rank, what we do is we conspire with somebody close to their rank to, hey, every chance you get, train with so-and-so, because I'm looking at them for this rank. And every once in a while, no matter what technique we're working on or what drill we're doing, every once in a while, throw the wrong attack. Why? Because Sensei's an asshole? That's subjective. Maybe. No. It's because I need to see what he does with his basics, with his kamae, his positioning, his evasion, his angling, those kind of things, when the script fails. That tells me more about his fundamentals, what he's paying attention to, and what he's learned and what he's internalized than any performance of a choreographed kata. He doesn't have to beat anybody's ass, whatever. I just want to see, is he paying attention to what's actually happening, not what he assumes is going to happen, because that's what was just demonstrated, right? Or that's what we're working on, right? Is he paying attention to what's actually happening? And regardless of whether it's quote unquote right or wrong, can he get offline to the right angle, be safe, that kind of thing? Minimum. Doesn't even have to have a follow-up. Because if kamae and taisabaki falls apart as soon as the unexpected happens, or we fall back on, karate do, whatever, right? High school wrestling, right? Then something wrong with the process, or somebody's not practicing enough at the right phases of the process. They don't trust the process, right? Things are not getting in the way they should be. Okay. Again, these changes, right? It's not because the technique stopped working, right? It's because our perception, right? It's reorganizing itself around this information that we wouldn't have, right? And that's the version of Dojo syndrome that concerns me. That is what I call out on a regular basis, okay? And sometimes I'll jokingly tell students that if we're not careful, a dojo that's rife with this dojo syndrome, or an instructor who allows students to train as though they're going to have some kind of ESP or information, and that goes for attacker and defender, right? That they would not normally have, right? A dojo can slowly become what I call a mutual admiration society. You know what that is? A mutual admiration society, right? Everybody looks good. Everybody makes everyone else look good. Everybody compliments everybody else, right? Everybody leaves class feeling successful, right? Now, again, please don't misunderstand me, right? I enjoy training. I enjoy training a lot, right? I laugh with my students. I enjoy the friendships that develop, right? I think a dojo should be a place where people enjoy coming to, right? Because community matters. Encouragement matters. Helping one another matters. They do, right? The dojo becomes that support group of people who are the only ones that can understand the struggles, the reasons you're training, right? The why, the confusion, the frustration, all that stuff, right? And anybody seriously focused on success in any given area needs a support group of like-minded people. Okay. Napoleon Hill called it a mastermind group. Whatever. Okay. We just called it a dojo, right? So again, community matters, encouragement matters, helping each other matters, right? But somewhere along the way, we have to keep asking ourselves a really, really, really important question. Why are we training? Okay. And I know that sounds like a really stupid question. It sounds like a really easy question. But let me suggest that if the answer is to look good in class, to impress my friends, to increase my self-confidence, those are not bad things. They're not. They're just secondary to the original purpose that we've already drifted away from. Okay? And I know, no one would say it. No one would say that, right? We know why we're there, right? But here's the thing. The dojo doesn't exist so we can become experts in the dojo. The dojo exists to help us become more capable of dealing with the realities life may eventually place in front of us. Okay? Yes, the dojo is where we make the mistakes that we don't want to be making out there, right? But those aren't always the same thing. Okay? So let me just see if anybody has any questions or comments up to this point, other than the normal chatting that goes back and forth between folks. Oh, Alan. All right. Just remember, tomorrow's Tuesday. I'll see you in class. Anyway. All right. If you just joined us, if you've been listening in or whatnot, and you haven't signed in already, go ahead and do that. Let me know where you're calling in from, all that wonderful stuff. All right. And yeah, I'll just get back to my notes. Okay. So all of this, right? This is one of the reasons why I appreciated something that my friend Rob Renner just said during a recent seminar, right? He talked about watching Hatsumi Sensei move, right? Soft, effortless, natural, almost magical, right? It looks almost magical, right? And then he smiled and said, well, of course, that's what we're after, right? I mean, that's what we want. That's what we want to do, right? Okay, exactly, right? Not flashy, not theatrical, not complicated, natural, dependable, appropriate, right? Something that we can still be doing if we need to defend ourselves in our 60s, 70s, 80s, that kind of thing, you know? But then he added something that really, it's kind of stayed with me, right? He said, if you trust the process, this doesn't have to take 20, 30 years, right? Most people could become really good in about 5. I did say if you lived in Japan, you went to class 6 days a week like he did for the last 20, 21 years, right? You could probably do it in 2. But most of us are not there, okay? You might be able to get much, much better at it faster, taking the route that I did. You throw yourself into a career that puts you in front of and face to face with aggressive people almost every day of the week. Not in the dojo. Okay. But either way, right? When he said that, if you trust the process, and I would add that if you are working the right process, right? A curriculum built on the right process, right? It doesn't have to take freaking forever, right? Most people can do it. Again, most people, I say, based on my experience, but again, my experience is, what do they say in ads, right? This is not the average, but either way, right? You get really, really good 4 or 5 years, right? And so, like I said, I smiled when he said that, because in my own curriculum, in our curriculum here at Warrior Concepts, right? That's about the point where a committed student reaches Nidan. If you've gone through the old Bujinkan ranking system that was extant for decades, right? The equivalent is about 8th or 9th Dan, which I think is why things are problematic when viewed from the outside by other martial artists. But either way, right? When a committed student reaches Nidan, right? This is the level where I expect dependable proficiency, right? Against a single unarmed attacker doing whatever the hell he wants, right? Again, one attacker, unarmed, right? Dependable proficiency with the fundamentals. Kamae, timing, distancing, angling, positioning, the gyakute, basic throw fundamentals, those kind of things, right? Not mastery, not the end of the journey, a milestone, a very important milestone, okay? But again, notice what Rob didn't say. He didn't say, if you trust the techniques. He didn't say, if you memorize more kata. He said, trust the process, right? And I think that's exactly where many students unknowingly step off the path, okay? When I say many students, right, we're setting aside folks that are, they're learning this stuff so they're learning some moves, right? They take the yellow belt course so they can learn a kick and then go out and get into fights and use that kick against people or whatever, right? Okay. So, but I think this is where many students unknowingly step off the path, right? It's around the process. Either they're not being guided through one, they don't know what one looks like, they don't want to go through the process, whatever, right? They want to skip the challenging steps or whatever, okay? And then what happens, right? Some leave because they think they've already made it, right? Others leave because the process becomes too damn difficult, too bruising on the ego, okay? Just as it's beginning to expose or reveal the deeper lessons hidden inside those kata, inside those drills and whatnot, right? Inside the earlier training, they need to protect ego. They need to protect identity, right? Or they need to do something that's, let's just say it for what it is, easier, right? Rank comes easier, whatever, right? Okay. So, but either way, right? Both mistakes come from misunderstanding what the dojo was trying to accomplish in the first place. Okay? So let's make this practical, right? Because once you begin recognizing dojo syndrome, you can start to see it everywhere. You might not call it dojo syndrome because you're not in a dojo. Okay? Might be called workplace syndrome. Might be called family dynamic syndrome. Whatever. Okay? But once you start recognizing it, you start seeing it everywhere. Okay? Including in one of the most common mistakes I see in class. Okay? I called it out tonight. I'm calling it out all week. And for my people in the intermediate and higher stages, please hold on to the bar. Okay? But I see this in class almost every single week. Okay? So, if dojo syndrome is real, what's it look like? Okay? That'd be helpful, right? Shit, sensei. How do I know if I'm doing this thing? How do I know if I have this dreaded disease of which you speak? Right? So, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, right? I don't have to go searching very far, right? I see it almost every week. And once I tell you some of these things, you'll see it too. Okay? And before I tell you the story, okay, let me, I don't know, reassure you, for lack of a better term, right? If you recognize yourself in what I'm about to describe, good. Okay? Because I did this, right? I had to recognize that I was doing it. I wasn't immune to this. Right? Every serious martial artist goes through it. And if they don't, then I would say that it wasn't their fault. It was the fault of whoever was freaking guiding them through it. Because that person may have been infected with dojo syndrome as well. Right? The blind leading the blind. But every serious martial artist goes through it. Every serious self-protection practitioner goes through it. Right? The question isn't whether it happens. The question is whether we eventually recognize it and move beyond it. Because again, if we can't see it, we can't recognize it, we can't fix it. Okay? So, one of the most common examples I see is something that I jokingly refer to as ESP training. You know, ESP, extrasensory perception. For my Espanol speaking listeners, I'm not sure what you call that in Spanish, but extrasensory perception, you know, fucking mind reading, right? Psychic martial arts. Right? Now, obviously, nobody believes they actually have psychic. Well, maybe some people believe they have psychic powers. Whatever. Okay. But here's the thing. If we're not careful, we may find that we often train as though we do. Okay. So what do I mean? Let's suppose we're practicing a simple punch defense. Okay. He's going to punch. I'm going to shift off of my naname line, tatsubaki, uke nagash, block, whatever you want to call it, right? We'll talk about that more later, okay? So the defender already knows a punch is coming. He knows which hand. He knows approximately when. He knows where it's going, what the target is, right? And more importantly, he knows what's supposed to happen after that. And without realizing it, and this is where the teacher or the senior student or the one who knows what's going on, right, needs to call it out, right? But without realizing it, his eyes, his sight consciousness begins watching the punching hand at the exclusion of almost everything else before it even moves. If it's supposed to be a kick, he watches the foot. If it's supposed to be a grab, he watches the hand. If it's supposed to be a double grab, you get the idea, right? Okay. He starts watching the hand, the punching hand, before it even moves. Shoulders tighten. His own hand starts drifting into position. His weight begins shifting. I'm not saying that any of these things in and of themselves is wrong. Weight shifting, hand start, those kind of things, right? But where's the focus? Okay? He doesn't do these things because the attack required these things to happen. He's doing these things because his conscious mind is already preparing for information that the reality of an actual street attack would never have given him. One of my teachers used to say, when an attacker shows up in front of you, what do you know about him? Other than color of his skin, how tall he is, whatever. What do you know? Do you know how good he is? Do you know how many bodies he's left behind in the past? Do you know how far he's willing to go? Do you know what his favorite kind of attacks are? Do you know if he throws straight punches, hook punches, uppercuts, kicks? What? Do you know if he's got a weapon hidden on his body? You know, nothing. You know that this guy wants to hurt you. And you know about yourself, generally speaking, what skills you're good at, what you should be paying attention to, that kind of thing, right? Okay. You know how you feel. You know what the adrenals and his pressure is making you do. Are you pitching forward? You leaning back a little bit? You know, right? But about him, shit. You know, next to nothing. See, it's another one of those big differences between what we're doing, what we're focusing on, and training for sport fights, competition fights. Because I can watch the guy I'm going up against in prior fights. I can watch video. I can watch live at other competitions. I can watch prior bouts if he's fighting before he has to fight me. I can collect all kinds of fucking information. Not counting the rule sets, the time limits, what's allowed, what disqualifies you, what gets penalized. Shit. Okay? But an actual killer or somebody who wants to beat, break, or maim you, whatever, on the street, it's a whole lot more that I don't know than there is I do know. Okay? But in the dojo, look at all this information we have. So, of course, we're going to be good at the technique, or at least we have a much better chance of doing things right. Okay. But what if we didn't have all that? Okay. But let's talk about that later. Now, let's look at the attacker, the student that's playing the role of the attacker. Right? The exact same thing happens. He already knows a block is coming. He already knows he's going to miss. Whatever, right? He knows what the defender is going to do next. So what does he unconsciously start doing? He starts pressing into the block before contact has even occurred, right? Lets his arm hang out there, doesn't retract, right? Begins helping the defender perform the technique. Neither student even notices it, okay? Because they're sharing information instead of responding to unfolding reality. Now, is there a time when the uke is supposed to help? Well, the uke is always supposed to help, but that help doesn't always come about the same way, right? The arm staying out there, the contact held, waiting for the next thing, whatever. Yeah, that's all beginner training. It's all necessary because the defender's trying to figure out the technique and what they're supposed to be doing, and the uke is supposed to be feeling that and recognizing it and understanding that side of the technique. Why does it work? What makes this work? Right? But eventually, the uke starts to, right? Even if we're still going slowly, out and back, or as soon as they miss with the grab, they retract for that next. That's what the bad guy's going to do. He's not going to go, oh, do you have a business card? Where do you train? That was awesome. He's not going to do that. His original intent is to beat, break, or kill you. By grabbing, by pounding, by stabbing, by shooting, whatever. Okay? So, training process needs to change because we learned the moves. Now, we need to understand how the moves are supposed to adapt to somebody who's not going to hang out, to somebody who's not going to do things predictably. Okay? But think about what I just described, the attacker and the defender, right? Think about that. The defender knows the future. Oh, isn't that amazing? The attacker also knows the future. They're both responding to a future that hasn't happened yet. That, my friends, is not martial arts. That is choreography. Okay? Again, during last Friday's masterclass, right, I wanted to expose exactly this assumption. I did it differently during tonight's class, and I'll do it as we do each thing, each class and each technique and each drill as the week progresses, because I need to break people out of this. And I know ego doesn't like it. We martial artists are some of the biggest control freaks on the freaking planet. Of course, that's why we're doing things. We want to be able to control bad situations. But ego also wants to control the training so that it doesn't get uncomfortable and so that we don't lose. So, again, we'll just use the master class, right? That ikichigai passing by kind of setup, right? So I wanted to expose what was going on, not by explaining it, but by letting students experience it, right? So I set up a passing by, right, attack kind of scenario, right, where you and the attacker, or the defender and attacker, are just on the sidewalk, wherever they happen to be, the mall, whatever, just walking by each other. Right? Like you walk by how many people a day? Dozen? 100? More? Never give it any thought. Okay? Because it's so common that the mind dismisses it. But that's what we were working with. So here we are, right? So, again, I set this up, right? And the attacker's body wasn't directly in front of the defender, right? We're not doing this chikara kurabe force on force contest kind of thing that most people see as, right, doing this kind of thing, right? We were working like a complete asymmetrical attack, which is like that's Takagi Yoshin through and through for those of you in the Bujinkan, right? I know most people don't practice Takagi Yoshin that way. They practice head on, but Takagi Yoshin, like no attacks from a Takagi Yoshin practitioner, comes from the front. It comes from a 45-degree angle to front, usually while passing by. And we set up different things, right, where the defender was standing still. They could be checking their cell phone, their watch. They could be looking for an address or whatever. All these people walking by, including the attacker. Okay? They don't know that it's an attacker until shit starts coming at them, right? And then we flipped it, and we had the attacker standing by, like somebody just kind of hanging out in the street, looking like they're going through their phone or whatever, just waiting for the right victim to go by. And so the defender was walking by a stationary attacker. So say problem 1, stationary defender, mobile attacker. Problem 2, stationary attacker, mobile defender. Problem 3, right? For those of you on audio only, I'm bringing my hands past each other as if you were walking towards somebody in the mall, grocery store, street, whatever, and you just walk past them. They're walking in the direction you came from, you're walking in the direction they came from. Okay? Very common attack setup that almost nobody practices from. Okay? So, again, they're not right in front of each other. Okay? So, the attacker walks past the defender while we set up different things, right? They could be delivering a hook punch back toward the face, right? Whatever. Okay. But what I did was set it up where, people are watching, right? The defenders are watching. Attacker walks by and gets beside the attacker or beside the defender, where the defender, like where we would normally just start writing somebody off. And next thing you know, a punch hooks back around straight into the face. The attacker didn't spin around, nothing like that. They were just walking by, and then brought the hand up, this knockout game kind of thing, right? So now the attacker's body's in one position, but the punch is coming in from a completely different position, and it's not what people are used to seeing, okay? The body and the attack occupied two different places in time. Right? And for many students, it felt like they were being attacked from two different directions at once, right? It's because the brain couldn't immediately organize what it was seeing, what it was processing. And that's exactly what I wanted. Not to confuse them, right? Part of it was to elevate some thinking toward the advanced levels where attackers are not morons, generally speaking, right? They've been doing what they do, criminal attackers, muggers, whatever, for a long time, and they're really freaking good at getting the jump on people. So I wanted to highlight that, right? But I didn't do what I did to confuse them. I did it to remove certainty that they had unconsciously been relying on. All right? Now, to be sure, most people got out of the way of the punch. All of them got out of the way 180 degrees away from the punch. Makes sense. That's the flight response. Right? Whatever part of the body or the body is in danger, out of the cave, right? Primitively, we move 180 degrees away from danger. That means we move directly away from it. Right? It's coming at our face. We're going to step back, whatever. Okay. So it makes sense, except that they weren't really moving away from the fist. They were moving away from the entire arm. And where did that place them? Right in front of the attacker's waiting other hand. Now, as they worked on this, they started making better choices, right? Slipped underneath the swinging arm. It's better, except many stopped there, right? Admiring their successful evasion. Meanwhile, they placed themselves directly in line for a kick or a grab or another punch. Say there was nothing wrong with the movement, the evasive movement. What was wrong was believing that the movement had finished the problem. Here, this leads into another piece of dojo syndrome. This freeze framing. Again, we need it at certain levels. But when we're studying in the dynamic levels, we have to train to not stop until there's either so much space between us, or until the attacker or defender loses, or until the teacher says stop, whatever, right? But we have to do that because reality doesn't stop. It doesn't stop because we performed a technique. It doesn't stop because we got out of the way, right? The attacker doesn't freeze frame, right? If we had pause on a DVD or whatever player these days, MP4, whatever, right? If we hit pause, everything freezes. The defender too. Okay. Now, beginner training and low intermediate, different process. When we say trust the process is not the same at all levels. Okay. But back to the class, that single lesson alone changed the way several students approached the rest of that class, the rest of the evening. Okay. But I was still seeing something else. Okay. I needed to expose something else because the attacker and defender were both still doing it. Okay. Even though my setup for this class was wrapped around the problem that we get desensitized to walking by dozens, if not hundreds of people every single friggin' day. And the brain just tunes it out. Broca's region tunes it out. It's a bunch of functions that just, right? The brain can't pay attention to everything to the same degree. We could not put the same attention on everybody that walks by. The brain would get overloaded with information. So it has to pick and choose. But what we can do with training is learn what suspicious or critical flags are that can signal a potential attack. Guaranteed? No. But it's worth paying attention to. So if we train to recognize those things, what we're really doing is training the amygdala, right? This early warning system in the primitive brain to notice them. We program ourselves all the time. So if we can do that, then the brain can do its thing. It'll look at somebody, do a quick assessment, go about its business. But if there's something that suddenly changes, the amygdala will wake up and cause us to give it a second look. Now, that second look might not come until we've been hit or stabbed or whatever, one or more times. But as long as we're still in the fight and we can still function, then we're going to have to operate from there. People don't generally like to train that way either, but they're the training, and that so this goes to the title of the episode. The episode's title is: Are we training to be good in the dojo, or are we training to be good in reality, which is really on the street in whatever condition we find ourselves? Okay, but either way, same class. I did something even simpler. Right, I had one of the students just stand there, right, and I was going to walk past them. Okay, and I did. I just walked past them. No attack, no intention, no hidden cue. I simply walked past. And something predictable happened. Most people should see this as interesting or fascinating, right? I saw it as predictable, because we were in the dojo. Okay, and I walked past that student. This thing happened. Walked by other students. Same thing happened. Okay. Before I even reached them, they raised their shoulders, started lifting their hands. They shifted their weight. They might even have started shifting away from me, right? They prepared themselves for an attack that they'd seen earlier, except there wasn't one. Nothing happened except their paranoid response. Again, not knocking the students. This is normal and natural. Monkey brain's doing this. Right? We don't realize how conditioned and programmed we are until it gets exposed. What got exposed is they weren't responding to me. They were responding to expectation. I mean, after all, we're in a martial arts school. It's sensei. I got to be worried about him tricking me. I did. I didn't do anything. Right? But, you know, I smiled because I remember doing exactly the same thing years ago. Right? This is a great lesson. It's a slightly uncomfortable lesson, but it's a really great lesson. And it's one that has to happen. Absolutely has to happen. Because it uncovers something most of us never notice. Right? Sometimes our greatest obstacle isn't reacting too slowly, wrong angle, whatever. Sometimes our greatest obstacle is reacting to information we wouldn't actually have. And that's part of the training. One of my teachers used to call it suspending belief. I have this information. My partner and I just watched the teacher demonstrate the technique with their uke. Right? Yeah. Most people only pay attention to the taiden, the physical demonstration. That's beginner mind. We also have to pay attention and keep in mind the context that would be done in. Uke, aka jackwagon, jumps defender, aka superhero, whatever. Anyway, you get the idea, right? But that defender wouldn't have known what was coming. We know, teacher demonstrated. But even though we know that that's coming, or that's what we're supposed to be working on, okay, I think the coolest things that can happen in training is when your partner like transition between two different techniques. We go from like punch defense to a grab defense or a kick defense or whatever, right? You get set up with your partner and you guys are deciding who's going to be attacker, defender, whatever, right? And then your partner, like you're getting ready. Okay. He says, are you ready? And you're like, you think about the technique you're going to be doing. Okay, good. Yeah, I'm ready. And then he throws the technique from the last technique. He throws the attack from the last technique. And we fumble and stuff. And we're like, oh, dude, no. We're working on this one now. Except that we got grabbed, we got kicked, or we got punched. I know. It wasn't the technique that we were supposed to be practicing, but that was the attack that was coming. And whether or not we saw it, recognized it, and shifted out of it, because I can move to Kamai and go, dude, we're now working on the grab, remember? Oh, yeah, duh, right? Or, teacher conspired or whatever, because I think those are great moments when they happen. Because people like to write it off and then they get another chance to do it again, but this time I'll get it right. See, now we're practicing to have second, third, fourth, 15 chances. That's great for a beginner. Not great for somebody who's supposed to be developing their fundamentals so that they can be relied upon in a bad situation. Anybody can do shit right when they've got enough time, they got enough do-overs, and everything's predictable and safe. No shit. Okay? So why does this matter? Okay? Because somebody might ask, I can hear it across the cyber void, right? Somebody might be asking, isn't anticipation a good thing? Sometimes, maybe. But anticipation and assumption are not the same thing, right? Real awareness stays curious. It stays open, right? It knows that things are uncertain, so it has to pay attention. Real awareness is awake, it's alert, it's alive, it's here, it's grounded, but it's open because it doesn't know what's going to happen next. Assumption is just the opposite. Assumption stops looking. When we're assuming, our attention narrows to what we expect to happen. And then we're caught off guard, we get pissed off. Or we get frustrated. It's the other person's fault. It's the other thing's fault. That wouldn't have happened. I would have, yeah, but it did. And you didn't. That's training for reality. Okay? Awareness observes. Assumption predicts. Awareness adapts. Assumption waits for confirmation. That is a huge freaking difference. And once you begin seeing it, like I said, once you begin seeing it, you will recognize it everywhere. Everywhere, not just in martial arts, right? You will see it in conversations. You will see it in relationships. You will see it in leadership, in decision making, right? We begin responding not to what's actually happening, but to the story we've already written in our mind. Okay? And this brings us to another interesting question. All right? I'm full of questions, aren't I? Call me the question guy. Right? If that's what happens during a relatively simple training exercise, what does this unknowingly prevent us from developing over months or years? What does this stop us from actually being capable of? What levels of proficiency are we missing out on because we don't even know this is happening? Because I believe this same phenomenon explains why some of the most important fundamentals in martial arts never become what they were originally intended to be. Okay? And that's where I'd like to go next. But before that, again, I'm my own producer here too. Let's just bring up the chat here. Questions, comments, complaints. Let's see. I don't see anything at the moment, but I'll give you a moment. Okay. Does this resonate with anybody? Has anybody caught themselves? Right? Or did you get caught by, like, we're supposed to be working on this. It's supposed to be a right punch at my face, and this guy threw a left punch and caught me off guard. Or it caught me enough that, like, I got out of the way, but shit, he didn't nail me with the next one. Right? I just saw this in a seminar where we're working we call it a Sen Undo exercise, where you're just shifting back into Ichimonji, doing this thing, shifting to the other side, because the attacker is just coming in, right? Punch, left punch, that kind of thing, right? And we're just kind of shifting off. And so we were just moving, right? And looking around the room, I saw people, like, they did one, right? And instead of resetting to neutral, they already shifted and were watching that next hand, just expecting it to come so they could catch it easier. And then, because they already know we're just doing one punch, next punch, one punch, next punch. Well, shit. Of course we can get out ahead of it if we know what the hell's going to happen next. This is why I call it martial ESP, or psychic martial arts, right? We act like we have freaking ESP. If we had ESP and we were that good at it, then we should freaking know that we were going to be attacked at the corner of 4th and El Dorado at noon tomorrow. In which case, unless I'm a freaking idiot or a glutton for punishment, I'm not showing up at 4th and El Dorado at noon tomorrow. So Kyle says, working on catching myself, but I've definitely been caught. Yeah. Okay. Alan says, I've had it happen. And for once, it wasn't Kyle's fault. Oh, my God. All right. So can you tell they're training partners? Yeah. Two of the ones I took to Japan this last time, and it was like I had kids along with me. Anyway, So cool. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So the question is do we know why we got caught? Because before this, right? I mean, even before I learned about this thing, I didn't know why I was making mistakes, or it was just ego's thing. Very quick, dude, you threw the wrong punch. Yeah, maybe so. But it was my responsibility to get out of the way at least and take up a safe position against whatever came at me. He threw the wrong, quote unquote, wrong punch. One, at the intermediate and upper levels of training, the attacker is never wrong. I'm not saying morally or ethically, right? I mean, a dick's a dick, right? He went out of his way to attack you, your family, whatever. This is not a moral judgment. I'm talking about him throwing whatever attacks, whatever way, at whatever timing he does. That's him, right? To expect that he's going to attack the way we do it in the dojo, or the right way, quote unquote, or my way, or whatever, that's the insanity, right? You're dealing with another human being. Irrational, self-motivated, self-interested, right? Going to choose their favorite techniques and their preferences, shit, just like we would. Unless we're smart enough to not have like favorite techniques or whatever, because they make us predictable. If something's a favorite, we do it a lot. And if the person who decides to attack us has that information about us, which is why it's way more difficult to survive a targeted attack by somebody who has done their research than to defend against an opportunistic or anger management issue on the street. Okay. So anyway, let's just keep on keeping on, shall we? Where are we? All right. So if we're unconsciously relying on information that reality would never give us, okay, this dojo syndrome, right? What does that mistake actually prevent us from developing, right? I alluded to that before I started asking for questions, right? But if we don't know we're doing this thing, right? What is that mistake actually preventing us from developing? Abilities, capabilities, skill proficiency wise, right? I think the answer is quite a lot based on what I know about this art and the levels of progress and things like that. How do I say this nicely? A shit ton. Okay. In fact, I believe it explains why some of the most important fundamentals in martial arts, not just in the Bujinkan, right? Across most martial arts, right? Never become what they were originally intended to become. Right? Why do I say that? Well, let me ask another question. Have you ever noticed that as students gain experience, they often become more technically accurate, but not necessarily more adaptable? I call them one-hit wonders, right? The movements look better. They look slicker. The kata becomes smoother. The sequence becomes easier to remember. But when something unexpected happens, they're suddenly back to forcing techniques or trying to remember what the hell comes next. Why? Why does that happen? Because somewhere along the way, the fundamentals subtly, unknowingly, right? They stopped getting developed. They stopped getting smoother, right? Because when people hear the word fundamental, right, what do they hear? Basic. When they hear basic, what do they hear? Oh, that's beginner shit. I'm beyond that. But maybe it's not because they stopped practicing them. Yeah, let's give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's because they didn't. Maybe it's not because they stopped practicing them. Maybe it's because they unknowingly replaced the purpose of the fundamentals with the appearance of the fundamentals. They replaced the purpose, which is function, with appearance, you know, what they look like, you know, the official way, the way our style does it. That, my friends, is a very important difference. It's a critical difference. Appearance over function. I know, Alan, you like that little sound. Anyway, right? So what does that look like in a couple of different fundamentals, right? So let's look at a couple, okay? Let's start with Kamae, okay? Ask 10 martial artists across arts that use Kamae, not talking Dachi, right? Because they're fundamentally different, okay? Even though to beginners, they look the same, okay? Even though, not style looks the same. To beginners, a stance is a stance is a stance, regardless of what word you use. But a Kamae is not a Dachi, even though it can look like a Dachi, but eventually it doesn't have to. A Dachi, a stance, will always look like a freaking stance. Okay? But he has 10 martial artists across, right, what Kamae is, and you'll often hear words like what? Stance, posture, position. Those aren't wrong, right? Those are module 1 beginner answers in our curriculum, right? Because they're right at that level, but they're also incomplete, right? All of these things, stance, posture, position, right? They're all aspects of Kamae, but just that. Aspects. Parts of. Okay? If Kamae becomes merely a stance, then I don't actually need it once the fight starts. Or I can pick and choose my favorite and just move. Right? That's why you'll hear people say things like nobody fights from Kamae. And they're right. If Kamae is only a pose. But that's not how I was taught to see and understand Kamae. It's not how I teach Kamae. It's not how my teachers teach Kamae. To me, Kamae is a relationship. Right? It's the continual organization of my body relative to his body, his intentions, relative to the available space, and the opportunities that are continually changing from moment to moment. That makes my job at defending easier and his job of attacking me more difficult at the same time. I know. That's why we start beginners at a certain place. Right? An advanced practitioner in this art is not just somebody who can do stuff, longer kata strings, faster, more precise, break more boards, whatever. It's somebody who can simplify the process of managing, assessing, and controlling the conditions in more and more complex problems. Okay? But either way, staying with Kamae, right? So again, it's a relationship. Sometimes that relationship looks like Ichimonji, Jumonji, I don't know, pick a name of a Kamae, right? Sometimes it looks like, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it changes 3 or 4 times in a single second as I move into, through, and out of any given one, right? As I cover and control the space between us, right? I can be moving around and shifting, right? And what am I doing as I'm moving through these things, right? people took snapshots and stuff, they'd be like, oh, you were in Ichimonji at one point, then you were in a Kosei at one point. I can even hear some people like, Dick, I saw that one, I saw that. Yeah, except that if my left brain focused on do that one, or ooh, look what I just did, I'm gonna get punched, I'm gonna get stabbed, I'm gonna get killed. Right? So that's a drill in and of itself, right? Once I can do the kamae, right? So can I just move around in, through, out of, and whatnot relative to him so that my limbs are always moving, right? That way it's harder for him to grab me, harder for him to have a stationary open hole to punch through, that kind of thing. Am I controlling his options, opportunities, and access? Or am I just taking up this position and just waiting for him to throw something? Right? So can I move through these things with a partner who's looking, and then maybe we have a drill where the partner, if I stall, if my limb stays in the same place for too long. Now I'm not like, whatever. I'm not being a spastic ass or whatever, right? If he thinks he has the opportunity, he can do it, right? Can he reach out and snag one of those limbs? Okay. Can he hit one? Can he disrupt my kamae, right? Or if we're doing it where there's punches or kicks involved, right? Can he take the shot? Or is he forced to take a shot out of desperation rather than certainty? In the beginning, the beginner is looking for predictability. They're looking for workable, reliable techniques because they don't know what to do. But those forms make them predictable, no matter what we call the art. Ninjutsu is supposed to be subtle, and it's supposed to be deceptive and all that kind of stuff, but in the beginning, that's not deceptive. That's shit, dude. I'll just attack your arm, I'll sweep your lead leg, whatever, okay? So now I need to start protecting the kamae, just like I protect any weapon, against attack. Most people just see it as cover to protect the brain and the heart and stuff like that. But what's protecting the kamae? What's protecting the stance? Right? Because against somebody really, really good, they'll just cut that lead arm, or they'll just hit that, or they'll grab it and use it against you, or attack that lead leg or whatever. Right? So can I stay unpredictable so he does not know what to do, and he can't use his cool shit that he's well practiced at and he's skilled at? My job is to minimize his options and maintain mine. Okay? And you won't know that until you're moving around and then he throws whatever he throws and I shift. Right? I'm avoiding in a particular kamae that just kind of happens because of what it happens and when it happens and whatnot. So I avoid that and go right back to what I'm going to reset and come back in. So what I'm testing is, does my shit break when pressure's applied to it? Or does it look like, sad to say, shit I used to do a long time ago, where sparring ended up looking almost like 2 6-year-olds in a sandbox. I'm throwing what I want at him, and he's throwing what he wants at me. And yeah, we might block something or whatever, but it's not very strategic. We're just trying to land points because whoever gets the most points within a certain amount of time gets you get to be called the winner. Nobody gets broken. Nobody. Not knocking it. People can have a lot of fun with that, right? If that's what they're into, great. But that's not the same as if you fuck this up, you're not going home. Right? So anyway, the shape of the kamae itself, that's not the lesson. It's the place we start from. Right? The relationship between he and I and what I'm controlling is the lesson. It's the kuraidori, the controlling of the kukan, that space between us, right? Access vectors and things like that, right? And if I train believing I already know what attack is coming, then I never really need Kamae. Not in the way it's designed, right? Because certainty merely replaces relationship. I can start from any start position. I can start from no position. Well, because I know what's going to happen. I don't really need to study 1,000, 2,000-year-old freaking techniques that have survived battlefield after battlefield if I'm going to operate like I have ESP. And if you really do have it, I'm assuming you're doing martial arts because you enjoy it, not because you're really worried about saving your life, because your ESP should save your life. Okay. Anyway, so that was Kamae. Let's look at Uke Nagash, what some people call blocking, right? And some people do learn it as a block, right? But the same thing happens. Same thing happens with Uke Nagash. Okay. The punch comes, I move, I intercept, done. I do my follow-up, done. Right? But if that's all it becomes, we've missed one of its greatest gifts. Because Uke Nagash, receiving flow, isn't simply about redirecting a strike. It's not about stopping a strike. If it was about stopping a strike, and I know in the Bujinkan, like all these aspects get lumped into a term. Uke Nagash. But there's Uke Uch, there's Uke Dome. So anyway, but it's not just this simple thing. Uke Nagash is about learning to feel based on that contact, feeling pressure, direction, intent, weight, all that kind of stuff, right? It's about receiving information from him that I didn't have a second ago, a minute ago, 5 minutes ago. Okay? Uke Nagash is about about getting information, right, to discover what his body is telling me through contact. Think about that. But if we just call it a block, we just assume that's what it is, right? Or, that's just a move in the technique so I can get to the throw at the end, or I can get to the shuto to the neck. Oh, look at me. Okay? If I already know where the punch is going and what's coming next, I don't really need to feel anything, right? I'm simply executing a memorized response, which is fine at the beginner level. And I don't mean white belt. I mean when I first learned that technique. Okay? But the higher we go, black belts shouldn't need to see a technique, not my words, Nagato Sensei's words, shouldn't need to see a new technique that they've never seen before more than 2 or 3 times before they've got the moves down. And then they shouldn't need to practice it with their partner more than 2 or 3 times to make sure that they have that right so they can then start exploring why these moves or this move here and what it's actually doing physiologically, neurologically, psycho-emotionally to his body, brain, heart, spirit, whatever, to take as many of those things out of the fight as possible. But if I'm only worried about landing a shot, then none of that matters either. Okay? But real encounters don't usually give us that luxury, right? Sometimes the incoming punch changes. Sometimes it retracts, right? Sometimes like it looks like it's going to be real and then he kind of pulls it just because in Japanese it's called kangi, right? There's some bo kata called kangi no kata, right? Kangi means to check, to test, to assess, right? I'm checking his skill level. I'm checking to see what he does when. Okay? But again, sometimes, like I said, sometimes the strike changes, sometimes it retracts, sometimes it becomes a grab, right? Sometimes there's a second hand I never saw. Right? If my training hasn't developed sensitivity because I was always reacting or responding to certainty, this ESP, this psychic martial shit, then I've unknowingly exchanged a living skill that the art's supposed to be wiring me with, right? If I knowingly swapped out a living skill for a rehearsed movement. All right, let's look at one more, right? Let's look at Totoku, right? Totoku is the shielding or guarding blade, right? Again, same principle. It shows up in sword work, okay? And again, many of you have heard me talk about Totoku for the longest time. I didn't use that phrase. I was just talking about guarding, and I just used English, right? But some people feel all warm and fuzzy when they learn a new Japanese word, right? But if you heard me talk about this Totoku, right, it's there in the unarmed and other weapon training too, not just in the sword, right? It's something we're going to be looking at during the fall Warrior Protector Weekend Intensive. But either way, right? The lead arm isn't simply out there, regardless of whether you're in Jumonji, Ichimonji, Seigan, whatever. It's not just out there. Why is your arm there? Because I'm in this gummi. That's where it's supposed to be. Well, as one of my teachers used to say, if you don't know why it's there, stop doing it. What am I supposed to do with it? I don't care. Now, he was very direct. He'd tell you, I don't care, stick it up your ass, right? But if you don't know what it's there for, then you can't use it for what it's there for. What are you left with? Guessing. Okay? So we're not really learning the science. Okay? But the lead arm's not simply out there. It's continually influencing. It's continually shielding and protecting. It's continually gathering information about him, his intent, all that. And it's also continually shaping the encounter because it's something he has to deal with, work around, or try to go after if he wants to get at me. Yet, if I always know what's coming, that lead arm becomes just another freaking position, just another part of my style that I'm only doing because it's a part of my style. It's not an active relationship. It's not a living tool. It's just somewhere to put my freaking hand. Make sure I'm doing things officially. That's not Totoku. Again, that's choreography. Right? So, again, here we are, right? I was going to talk about Taisabaki. Let me just skip through some of these things, right? So, again, the question is, right? What are we training for? Dojo proficiency or warrior protector proficiency, regardless of the attack. Okay? Do you see the pattern? The fundamentals don't stop working. We stop needing them, or at least we stop believing that we need them. Because with psychic martial arts, Dojo syndrome, certainty just fills in the gaps. Fills in the gaps that those fundamentals were designed to solve. And that's dangerous. Not because the dojo has failed us, because we're unknowingly becoming dependent on something, right? Precognition, right? Information, shit like that. That reality will never give us before the attack happens. As a matter of fact, back in the day when I was still with Stephen Hayes, we did these annual ninja festivals, right? And we seniors and group leaders were asked to do demonstrations. So I think it was maybe like after lunch on Sunday, before the afternoon training started. I think it was Sunday, maybe it was Saturday, either way, right? We would all have these demonstrations worked out and stuff like that, right? And it was a way for Sensei Hayes, because he didn't test us the same way. He made us do these demonstrations and then assessed our skill ability based on what we were doing, not just the technique. If he caught us watching for a hand that was supposed to come or delayed or stalled or whatever, it counted against us. Okay, this precognition shit, right? So, but every once in a while, I remember doing it once, but one of the best versions of this psychic martial arts that I ever saw was a friend of mine who wasn't really going for a test. He got together with a peer, right? And what they did was they did a demonstration of two ninja fighting. And what they kept doing was throwing the same attack at each other at the same time. So they would punch each other's fist, or they would stomp each other's bottom of their foot and roll away, whatever, right? And it was just this display of doing what this art is not about, right? So anyway, this kind of came to me. It wasn't in my notes. I just remembered doing that. Everybody's doing the same thing the same way at the same time, and right, and they made fun of it. It was awesome, right? Anyway, so this is one of the reasons you'll hear very senior teachers. Like this last time we were in Japan, Nagato Sensei said he was revisiting the basics again. He's returning to the basics. And students sometimes wonder, like, why, right? Why are you doing Ichimonji no Kata again? Why are you at your level, right? You're a Soke. Seriously? You don't know it by now, right? Or they'll say, we're going to return to basics, right? Why are we doing Ichimonji again? Okay. I'm betting that a lot of people will not show up virtually or live for the Daikomyosai that we're doing in January because calling the theme, right? Revisiting the fundamentals. And the reason why a bunch of people aren't going to show up is why? Because they already know them. And my question is, at what level? Beginner level, intermediate level, advanced level, senior level, Tatsujin level. Huh? Because I'm assuming that everybody knows them at the beginner and lower intermediate level. And then we're going to look at them from upper ones. Okay. How do you catch somebody for an omote gyaku when both of you are fighting and struggling and all that kind of stuff? How do you create an opportunity in the midst of fists and hands and whatnot flying to where their arm stops long enough? Quarter of a second, half a second, right? So you can catch it. Or for Musodori, or for Ganseki Nage, or okay. But students sometimes wonder, right? Why the hell are we doing Ichimonji again? Right? Why another wrist grab defense? This looks just like the thing from Mod 1, except that we're going to Ichimonji first. Uh-huh. Why? What changes? Right? Why another Kihon? Well, there aren't other Kihons, right? If we're asking why another Kihon or why another Kihon class, then we don't understand the process. It's not that we don't understand the techniques at a certain level. We don't understand the process. Okay? But what's the base assumption that those questions all come from? We've already said it, right? The assumption is, I already learned that. And again, my answer is maybe. Or maybe you've learned the movement. And now you're finally ready to begin discovering what it was actually trying to teach. Right? Students get thrown off in the intermediate levels when I say, you can do the kamae. Yes, I can do the kamae. Okay. Which kamae do you know? They show me these different kamae. Great. Okay. What is that kamae? I'll pick one. Doko no kamae, whatever, right? What is that kamae teaching? What is it teaching you? What ability does it give you? Don't tell me what you're doing to them. Don't tell me how to take it up, right? What is it teaching you? And what other kamae do the exact same thing? What are the positions that are not officially kamae, they're not named, other than a blanket name, Ihan no kamae, formlessly adaptive, still does the same thing. How do you do that thing with a sword? How do you do that thing with a hanbo? How do you do, you get the idea? How do you do that thing in an argument where you can't smack the person? Ichimonji no kata, what does it teach? Don't tell me what you're doing with your body to their body. What are you doing to control the situation to where you maintain options, you take away theirs, and you end it quickly? Because if you don't know that, then you can't tell me how you're going to use Ichimonji no kata. This is a Tatsujin level thing, a master's level thing. How you're going to use the same process, the same thing in a conversation, in a relationship, in an argument. No, you're not going to chop the guy in the side of the neck with a shuto. Okay. Again, somebody may have learned a technique's movement, the official kata, the introductory lesson, right? But the question is, right? If you've already learned that, and instead of still practicing the same way, right? Why don't we start now looking into it so that we can discover what this thing is actually trying to teach? Omote gyaku. Everybody knows it as an outside wrist reversal, but most people depend on pain compliance. Pain is highly unreliable in an actual violent situation. It looks like it's really reliable in a dojo because nobody's adrenals are kicked in. And many people that are training in martial arts and self-defense are highly pain averse. So yeah, it would seem that pain compliance is like dependable. If I make him hurt, and then we get this logic happening, right? If I make him hurt, see, then what he will do is he will... Bullshit. Don't tell me about he. Tell me the difference between the he who is absolutely fucking enraged and couldn't give a shit less about his own life, let alone yours. Tell me about the one who's whacked out on frickin' drugs, and even if he can feel pain, it's going to be delayed by several seconds, and it's going to be minimized or overshadowed by the effect of the drugs. Tell me about the one who has a neurological disorder who can't feel pain the same way that everybody else does. Tell me about... this generalization bullshit. That's another form of dojo syndrome. The assuming that the bad guy will do these things. Why? Well, because that's what I would do. You don't know that. Yeah. Again, very different things. Yeah. So, again, what are we training for? Okay. And again, we really have to worry about... I think we have to worry about this dojo syndrome, because if we don't, if an instructor allows this to go on, then we don't have a dojo anymore. We can call it one, but what we really have is a mutual admiration society. Look how good we all are. Isn't that awesome? You're awesome. I'm awesome. Right? Think about the rules on Facebook. Can you point out that somebody's making a mistake with their technique? Nope. The admins will immediately step in. We're all positive and supportive here. I understand positive and supportive. Positive and supportive. Yeah, I want him to do well and not die against some jackass that it doesn't care what he knows and what color his belt is. But again, here we are. Okay. But if we understand that the fundamentals never stop teaching, just like we talked about in past episodes, another question, another question, another question naturally comes up. What am I missing? Right? What am I doing that I can't see? Which is why we train with people who are better than us or who know things or who can spot our mistakes. I get it. Ego doesn't like it. But nobody ever said you had to like it. Okay. So, and people nod in agreement. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do that. We do. Well, if that's true, then why do so many students stop trusting the process right when those deeper lessons are about to become obvious? Because I think it's one of the biggest reasons martial artists plateau. Okay. So, again, if the fundamentals keep teaching us and the questions themselves continue changing, right? If the training process looks different at different levels, it's not just the same shit, faster, harder, more complex, whatever, right? Then why do so many students plateau? Why do so many sincere, dedicated martial artists stop progressing? I don't think it's because they stop training. I think it's because they stopped trusting the process that brought them this far. Or they keep using the same process. That's a huge thing too, right? Here's what I mean by that. Right, a few episodes ago, maybe, I don't know, something like that, right? I used an example about like if a person wanted to get fit, let's say they wanted to bulk up and add some muscle, right? Who should they go talk to? Somebody that's done that. Not their friend, not some jackwagon who's got a video online or whatever, right? Somebody who's actually done that, who was in their shape before, because some people were just lucky they were born with good genetics and shit like that, and they've never been fat ever. They've never been whatever, right? I want to go talk to that person, right? Well, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to give me their process. Here's what I did. Here's what kind of exercises I did. Here's how I dieted. Here's how I did this. Here's how I did this, right? And so if that person works that process, there's a really good chance that they're going to get to that level. Cool. Okay. Now, what if the person who had the process, right? They worked the process, they got to this level, right? They're sharing that with other people so they can work the process and all that. What if this person wants to bulk up even more? What if they want to add, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 more pounds of muscle, right? They want to get ready for a Mr. Olympia competition if they even exist anymore, whatever, right? Now what? He can't keep following the same process. He has to change his process because the process he's been sharing with the people who want to get to where he is, that's what it's designed for, to get somebody from that condition to this condition. He can't keep using the same process to get to the next level. It's not designed for that. If it was, he'd already be there. He has to change the process, which is why we introduce randori, drills, and other parts of training that then make people look at things and go, well, that's not how it's done in Japan, or that's not the official way. That's not how we do it in this style. Alan, what do I say? When people use things like that, I say, it's not my fault. And it's not because I'm being like, oh, that's not my fault. No. The reason they think that way, the way they speak that way, the way they see things, their perspective, not my fault. Because my students are taught better. Well, at least they're taught differently. The results can speak for themselves. Okay? Because I've had students who've been attacked. And we're all just fine. Okay? So, again, the process is going to look a certain way for a beginner. The process has to change for the intermediate student. It has to change again for the upper intermediate student who's preparing to enter into the advanced level training, just like it's going to change for the advanced level people. And it's going to change again for seniors. It's going to change again for people working in the Tatsujin levels. Okay? This is natural. This is the way reality works. And we don't have to like it. One more thing. Over the years, I have noticed something. Okay? And this is about where students leave. Right? Talked about it earlier, but students tend to leave at two very interesting points. Right? The first is right after they've learned enough techniques to feel confident. And they may not leave. They may what I call shadow train. What that means is they haven't officially quit, but they don't show up for classes often or whatever. Okay? There's no proof that they're doing physical training, but they sure show up on the Facebook pages and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Not for me to say. Okay? But they've learned enough techniques. Things start looking the same. I know that one. I know that one. I know that one. So there's no point in training in it, right? Because I know that one. But when they do it, they're still doing it the same way. They might have a couple of variations here or there, but whatever. Okay? They've earned a belt or 3 or whatever, right? They know the kata. They can perform what they've been taught consistently enough in the dojo. And somewhere in their mind, they begin thinking, I know this now. And they mistake familiarity for capability. We just talked about that recently, right? Sometimes they keep training, sometimes they quit. But regardless, their study and looking at things to understand it has slowed down significantly, if not stopped. I mean, why would they keep looking? Why would they keep studying? They already know, right? What's that old martial arts saying? What's the quickest way to get a teacher to go away? Use 2 words. I know. Okay? So that's first place. Second place that people quit is almost the opposite. The techniques begin dissolving into principles. There's more randori, there's more drills. There's more drills exposing mistakes, footwork errors, timing errors, right? They lose the technique they were going after. Suddenly, there aren't as many simple answers anymore, right? Now we're asking questions about timing, distance, perception, initiative, adapting to more than just straight line attacks, right? Things become less concrete. Even Hatsumi Sensei said, nothing is fixed, right? Things become a bit more or a lot more messy, less black and white. Training becomes more demanding, not physically, mentally, emotionally, even spiritually. Identity is challenged. Who the person thinks they are. I am a fill in the blank black belt. I've been training for X number of years. Right? Ego is challenged because now the curriculum is no longer asking you to memorize movements. It's asking you to change the way you see, what you see, how you translate and assess what you see. It's not about mechanics. It's about dynamics, variations of attacks, angles, pressure. Some students love that. Others become frustrated because it feels like after finally learning the answers, someone went and changed the questions. In reality, well, that's exactly what happened. Because we have to get past that I know to get to the what am I missing? Okay? And again, we're right back at trust the process. Again, I had the privilege of training with my friend and fellow Dai Shihan, Rob Renner, and near the end of one of the seminars, right? He was talking about Hatsumi Sensei, right? I mentioned this earlier, right? About how Hatsumi Sensei moved, right? And made things look almost magical, right? And again, right? He smiled and said, "That's what we're after," right? I mean, that is what we're after, right? Efficient, if not just effective, but efficient and effortless, and or at least seemingly effortless, right? That kind of thing, right? Exactly. It's what we're yes, okay. Not because we're trying to impress anyone. At least I don't think so. It's because when movement becomes that natural, it's no longer something you're forcing. You don't force yourself to go to the refrigerator, pour a glass of milk or whatever, right? Go back down, plunk yourself in front of the couch, and drink your milk, eat your cheese balls or whatever. And just, I don't know, milk and cheese balls. Maybe that wasn't a good mix. But anyway, you get the idea, right? You don't think about taking the steps. You don't think about opening the refrigerator. You don't think about pouring the, it's just, you don't think about the mechanical. You just do what it is that needs to be done, and it's friggin' easy, right? Every once in a while, the cap on the bottle, like, mother trucker. And you're looking at it like, why the hell that happened or whatever. But that's the only time the brain wakes up. There's a glitch in the matrix. But the point is, it's no longer something you're forcing, right? It's simply an expression of understanding. You don't say, I know how to do that. You go, duh. Yeah. What do you mean, do I know how to walk? Right? So that's a different mindset than somebody who goes, oh yeah, I know that technique. Way different. Right? So again, if you trust the process, right? I'm not going to go into the years thing again or whatever, right? But again, Rob didn't say trust the techniques. Didn't say memorize more kata. Didn't say collect more information. Didn't say, study the Bunsen Chukai or whatever, even though some of us do that kind of weird stuff, right? Trust the process. But to trust the process, we have to what? We have to fucking know what the process is. Okay? And I know that Rob said, you trust the process, right? Be really freaking good at those fundamentals in 5 years, maybe even less, right? Because when I think back over my own journey, I remember the first time I naturally applied Mushadori during a violent confrontation, right? I was a military policeman. This guy was freaking bigger than me, jacked, trained killer, earned his black belt that day, went out drinking. So he's like, so this Mushadori was not done on a training partner or a wimp. This was against somebody who, big time bodybuilder, right? His freaking arms were like the size of my thighs, and my thighs were way bigger back then, right? This Mushadori was applied against a drunk, enraged soldier who had skill, too much alcohol in him, and something to prove. And he was not going to let me do my technique on him. I wasn't standing there thinking, I wonder if I can do a Mushadori. Right? In the middle of that altercation, my arm slipped into position against his arm, and I remember part of my brain going, I know this one. And I just completed it. But it was already happening. Right? That's Heijoshin. Right? Everyday mind. It's like a fucking walk in the park. That's a different level of knowing the technique. Not chasing it, not trying to do it, not fighting to get it, recognizing that it's like, it feels like it's already happening. How about if I just help it along? Okay? So that moment wasn't important because I used Mushadori. It was important because it showed me that something inside me had changed. The process had begun transforming information into perception. And that memory, we all have memories like that, right? That's just one that's just click. first time that was done, right? And I'd only been training at that point for a year and a half, 2 years. But it was, if I wasn't working, I was practicing. Of course, I also had lots of military and non-military violent offenders and perpetrators to practice on too. So anyway, so we're talking about the process, right? Every layer prepares us for the next layer. Okay. Just like for my students now, right? Things are laid out differently than when I went through it, right? Because I adjusted things based on a process, not just a learning of techniques and hoping that they all kind of fit together, right? Each level presupposes that not just that you learned the stuff before, but that you have that layer of ability. Because the next module, yes, there's different techniques, but there's also some of the same techniques. But you should be able to do them easier and from a different position and place. Like we have a double-handed wrist grab, kind of wrist grab kind of thing, double-handed, chop it off, move to kamae, that kind of, yeah, of course. Okay. But at mod 2, person has to do it from a Seigan, long range, with one hand against somebody who's bigger and stronger. Mod 3, when they do it, sets up a throw. Mod 4, both hands are trapped. We're going to move in a way that doesn't just release the hands, but also catches an arm bar for a Gyakunage throw, all as a part of the same movement. It's integration, right? So, again, underneath all of this stuff, right, the curriculum is designed to develop a student's ability to perceive, to organize, to adapt, to recognize opportunities, to become calmer, right? To become calmer under pressure, to acquire less conscious thought while making better decisions, right? That's a very different set of goals than simply learning more techniques. Okay. So we'll talk about this more, but this is setting up things for next episode. Okay. So next episode, we're actually going to take a look at answering the question, what does a curriculum look like? Or what could it look like? Because I'm not going through my curriculum and going, we do this and okay. No. We're going to take a look at a process-driven curriculum rather than a technique, skill-driven curriculum. Both have plenty of skills and techniques, but one includes more, and the reason for and the development of those skills and techniques in ways that go way beyond just can you do it or not, and do you have some henka or variations for doing it. Okay? Because again, we need to answer the question, are we training for the dojo or are we training for reality? Okay? Reality says he's not going to let you do this shit to him. Pain compliance is not reliable. Okay? And there's different types of reality, right? When somebody says it's not going to work on the street, that wouldn't work in a real fight or whatever, right? I need to know what that person actually means when they say real fight, right? When we say that won't work in a real fight, right? Have you noticed that phrase gets thrown around all the time? Okay. Sometimes by experienced martial artists or sport fighters, sometimes by complete beginners, sometimes by people who have never been in a serious confrontation at all, ever in their entire life, outside of, okay, phrases like that would never work. Just put on gloves and get in the ring. That's not realistic. Maybe not. But before we can answer that question, I think we have to ask another one, right? Compared to what? Which reality? When someone says a real fight, what are they actually picturing? An MMA bout, a boxing match, a drunken argument outside of a bar, right? A crazy psycho with a knife, right? A domestic assault, a battlefield engagement, a robbery, police officer trying to handcuff a resisting suspect, a corrections officer inside a prison. In my case, a military policeman trying to restrain an intoxicated soldier without seriously injuring him, right? A parent protecting a child. Those are all real, quote unquote, real, but they are not the same problem. They have different legal considerations, different tactical considerations, different emotional pressures, different objectives, different consequences for acting, not acting, getting it wrong, whatever, right? So before I ever ask, will this technique work? I first ask, what problem was this technique designed to solve? I don't get into those pissing matches with somebody who obviously is talking about one particular type of fight, and then they're gauging everything else based on that one preconceived thing. See, psychic martial arts again, right? Blah, blah, blah. Put on the gloves, get in the ring, right? Yeah, but there's things that now that I have gloves on, I can't do with my fingers to certain body parts on you, like the squishy thing called an eyeball and your fucking throat. Okay, if what we're dealing with it, then we're not dealing with when we have a certain paradigm. And this is what we're dealing with. What are we not dealing with? Pew-pews and knives and clubs and that wouldn't be a fair fight. Well, no shit. I'm not training for fair fights. I don't get inside those kind of things. I don't do that for fun. I don't even watch it for fun. When I do watch those fights, it's educational. I'm not picking sides. I'm watching fighter mentality, strategic thinking, tactical operation, movement. He sucks. Whatever. Okay? Not picking sides. I'm watching how people fight. I'm watching how that guy fights. Then I'm going to go look for other examples of that fighter type, so I can go train as an advanced level student to make sure that my shit in this art works and can be used against that fighter type without having to change my shit. If I have to change my shit, then my art has a hole in it. I've been trying to find the holes and break this thing for 40 freaking years. Okay? So, I think there's a lot of this is where a lot of discussions go sideways. People watch kata, they evaluate it as though it's trying to imitate a live competitive fight. I don't think that's what kata is doing at all. Right? It's an instructional model. It's preserving a dependable solution to a particular tactical problem. It's an expert model. It's a bad habit breaker. There's lots of things it can be used for. The kata isn't trying to reproduce every possible variation. It's isolating a relationship, a principle, a decision, a type of timing, a strategic idea. Exactly the same way a driving instructor takes you to an empty freaking parking lot. Nobody says, well, traffic doesn't look like this. No shit. Of course it doesn't. That's not the point. The parking lot isn't pretending to be a freaking highway. It's preparing you for it at a certain stage. Nothing more. Because I can take that intermediate or advanced student back to the parking lot. Empty. Now we're going to focus on the lines. Pull into this to park. Make sure your car is spaced and aligned. Well, as long as I'm in it. No. Spaced and aligned. Because you know what? There's other fucking people in this world, and you're going to be a considerate driver. How about that? Okay. Then later, I can take that same student back to that same parking lot. Call it kata if you want, but we can take him right back to that same parking lot with cars in it. Or I may take him to the parking lot, got some friends with cars that they know the risk, but he's at a certain level. So, okay, same risk it would be if I parked at the grocery store. Okay. Now we're going to practice pulling in, parking, pull back out, pull back in and park. Great. Pull back out. Now I want you to back in. Now I want you to, okay, understand? We did the same thing with parallel parking, all that kind of stuff, right? I keep revisiting the same freaking parking lot, the same kata. Students at a different level, skill set is elevated. The problem is more complex because initially that parking lot didn't have any cars in it. And now it does. And then I'll take him to, you know what? We got to pick up some groceries. Let's go to the store. You're driving. We're going to do side roads, all that kind of stuff. Now we're pulling in. Oh, shit. Now there's people walking around. There's cars pulling in out of parking spots. There's cars moving around, but not at highway speed. So we elevate to more complex problems. But the fundamentals that teenager or student driver is employing are the same. Acceleration, braking, steering, maneuvering, aligning, managing the system. They don't they don't do things that are more difficult with the car, like how the car's operation. Like they're not sitting on the hood with a modified steering wheel and some weird levers and stuff no. They get better at using those fundamentals in more complex situations. That's the mastery process. But if we let dojo syndrome get in the way, then we have a problem. Okay? Anyway, that's what I have for this one. Let me just see if any questions or comments came in. I don't see any. I must have put people to sleep. All right, I'll wait for a minute or two. Okay, don't forget things that are coming up, right? If you are a local student and you're training this week, tomorrow's class, our Shinobi Kai class, please make sure you have your open finger sparring gloves and whatnot because we're working some drills, right? We're doing some randori with some of the fundamentals. Whiteboard Wednesday will include something about that process that we will also do on Friday Masterclass. But for my local Shinobi Kai and Black Belt students, for the next couple of weeks, we are going to be using randori and drills to explore the fundamentals you have already learned to make sure that we are moving them toward function, right? And not having them stagnate in form. If you are a member of the Ninpo Masterclass program, right, then you'll see how we're doing some of these things because you'll be in on Zoom and all that kind of stuff, right? So we got those, and what else is coming up? Next big thing is, other than our annual summer family picnic that we do, next big training thing is in October. Okay, so the fall Warrior Protector weekend intensive. Okay, so let's see. I think I gave people enough time to type some things in. I don't see anything. So in that case, this wraps up another one. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. I will talk to everybody again next time. Be safe, train hard, and I'll see you next time on, where are we? Come on, on KUDEN. Trin said it.